Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are doing another Luetin video. I love big weapons, if you haven't noticed that, and this sounds like another Luetin big weapons video. So buckle up for the Quake Cannon, and it's shells made of Exterminatus. Sounds big, sounds up my alley. Let's do it. Oh, but before, remember, check out the merch store. I got cool t-shirts. Shelf is down below. Link is there. It's the best way to support the channel. Follow me on Twitch. Follow my Instagram. Follow my MMA podcast I run with my brother if you like the UFC. And let's check this bad boy out. Luetin. Got nothing but love for the guy. He's a solid dude. Oh, the only thing is he uses great music, and if I don't hum over it, I get hit with copyright restrictions. So you're gonna hear me sing about the Quake Cannon. So you got that going for you. Leave none alive. If they flee, cut them down without mercy. If they hide, crush them to paste. Oh man. Oh. Okay. Big gun. Dude with big gun. Guns are bad. Crushing Xenos with a big gun. Another big gun. And a big gun. Guns are big. Bigger guns are better. Dun dun. Big gun. Big bad gun.
Now, although we had 40k's most insane weapons
Thanks.
start as a new series, I also want to continue with individual episodes of the Law Gear series. And it's been a while since we looked at one piece of 40k war gear. Now, I never really thought about it before, but war gear is such a piece of 40k terminology in itself. And one thing I have been thinking a lot about lately is just what makes 40k 40k. And it seems that bashing two words together to make an overtly simplistic but descriptive word like war gear is certainly a part of it. Now, following on from us looking at the Titanic War on Riser, one thing I noted was people commenting on the quite obviously bonkers main gun of the Nemesis Titan, the Titan-killing Quake Cannon. The Quake Cannon is well known by the enemies of humanity as being the weapon to end battles. It is the scourge of enemy fortresses across the galaxy, and although it's most famously seen on Nemesis Titans, it can also be mounted on a...
Sorry, is the Nemesis a class of Titan, or is it like a Chaos Titan, like a Titan standing against the Imperium?
an
Imperium Nemesis, if you will.
Guard Banesword tank, thus gifting the Militarum one of their most effective ways of breaching an enemy stronghold. Although it exists for this purpose to operate as primarily a siege gun of earth-shattering power and capable of turning nearly any fortification into crumbling ruins and to enable infantry to breach heavy strongholds, it functions equally well against enemy units. In fact, it is very likely that there will be little, if anything, left of even Titanic-scale targets who find themselves on the receiving end of a Quake Cannon.
Yeah, I'm always curious. So when you have things like the analogy that I think of is naval gunfire. Now, the modern U.S. Navy doesn't have ship-mounted cannon or ship-mounted guns, but the old World War II and even Vietnam-era battleships absolutely did. And they were famous, especially in Vietnam, which is, remember, a largely coastal country. These ships off the coast could actually engage a lot of targets with naval gunfire, and it was famous for being utterly devastating, but also utterly imprecise. And so while it could be called in, usually on large enemy fortifications that they wanted destroyed, it would be able to wipe out, for example, an entire hillside or just flatten a hill entirely. So there is definitely a tactical precedent for these sort of ridiculously large cannon. And there is, of course, the nice thing about ships like Titans is that they can carry a big, big payload because they only need to maintain positive buoyancy.
The power of the Quake Cannon combined with the armour of a Super Heavy has established the Banesword tank as the pinnacle of Imperial siegecraft. Many Imperial commanders would be willing to exchange 2 entire regiments for a single Banesword, such is the reputation of this tank. Indeed, Imperial...
I really appreciate that the Imperium had the foresight to mount their most impressive weapon, right, instead of wasting time building a Titan around it, just to stick it on a really powerful tank. This is, of course, the much better, lower risk way of bringing that weapon to bear on the battlefield. Because you have to think Titans are slow, and they have the problem of being huge, right? They're easy to track. You're never going to lose track of a Titan. You're never going to wonder where a Titan is. And while a Bane Sword is big, it is still infinitely more concealable and maneuverable than a Titan.
Imperial combat doctrines hold an honoured place for the Bane Sword. While the cannon itself is impressive, it is in fact the ammunition of the Quake Cannon which is its most noteworthy and the true origin of its fabled reputation. This is because each Quake shell fired contains fragments of a planet which has undergone the Imperium's most destructive order, that being Exterminatus.
Oh, it literally is made of Exterminatus. Okay.
Quake Cannon and even Quake shells can often be named after the planet from which their potency has been captured. It is even described among the Mechanicus and Titanicus operators that their observation how Quake shells can appear to scream the presumed death throes of a world's destruction.
Okay, I'm gonna posit a theory that there is a whole bunch of warp nonsense surrounding this. Because, I'm just gonna point out, if your goal was to harvest the power of the Exterminatus in a weapon, why would you have the extra step of harvesting the dead planet? Whatever you did to launch the Exterminatus, just save one of your Exterminatus bombs and stick it in a Quake Cannon shell.
As they cut through the air. These observations have even led to speculation among the more imaginative members of the Imperium that this noise is something beyond just the roar of the physical ammunition cutting through the air and is in fact a darker, more tragic origin, that somehow the Mechanicus have collected the combined death wails of a planet's population. The final screams of billions of humans tearing across the sky before delivering ultimate devastation upon the enemies of mankind. Tech priests have not sought to quash these macabre rumours. But
Tech priests probably don't care.
Just how
They're like, we did them a favor, man. Those fleshy bodies weren't going to last long anyway.
this occurs is not something widely noted within the events of Exterminatus. Usually when we talk about Exterminatus, we just talk about the physical process by which a planet is destroyed. However, when a planet undergoes this process, dependent obviously on the specific details on a planet's situation and how safe it is to even approach it, tech priests and Magos geologists from the Adeptus Mechanicus can be dispatched to collect and store quantities of the shattered planet as it breaks and crumbles under the dooming forces being deployed.
Right. Why?
The Mechanicus will attempt to collect their samples as quickly as possible and in as large quantities as possible. For this is not necessarily a highly regular event, and so where it is necessary and possible, these collections will attempt to secure a very decent stockpile of material for further use. But also, whenever this collection occurs, it is unavoidably an extremely dangerous task. The collecting process is not the only study the Mechanicus carry out, as the geologists will also have stationed their ships in a low orbit, and the purpose of endangering these Mechanicus ships as they're racked by powerful forces emanating from the planet's destruction is the collection of information. Specifically, these blast waves are captured by arcane wave recorders, which are then able to be replicated back on Forge Worlds, although the collective fragments and wave energy are to be reborn in the form of one of the most devastating munitions in the galaxy, the Quake Shell.
This doesn't make one fraction of sense. Not one lick of it. That the earthquakes can be recorded and then you can put them in the fragments of the planet as it's destroyed, but you have to get them soon or else they're gonna lose their vibe. What? It's a planet, dude. You can come back in 10 years, 100 years and just keep harvesting it, right? It's just dirt and rock and a molten core of nickel and stuff. This is the most nonsense 40k I've seen. Well, it's the most nonsense 40k thing I've seen today. Which isn't saying much.
This process, although being very dangerous, is extremely important. because it's documented by the Mechanicus that the weight of Quake shells is noted as being dependent upon the power of the Exterminatus from which the energy was extracted. The mass of a Quake Cannon shell is not as much as that fired by, for example, a Storm Sword's Hellhammer, but Quake shells are still massive and have to be fired over significantly large distances because of its deployment in the role of siege breaking and Titan killing. If you had to get up close and personal and able to actually fire this, it would somewhat defeat the purpose. The extreme range.
So, okay, one interesting sort of example that's maybe analogous to this is the process of refining uranium for nuclear weapons. Well, modern nuclear weapons are generally use plutonium, but in the Second World War, when they were first designing the first nuclear fission weapons, the U.S., of course, realized that they needed a really pure form of not just uranium, but a highly specific, very heavy isotope. And so doing so is incredibly difficult, right? How incredibly difficult, you ask? Well, you have to basically take this uranium, turn it into a gas, uranium hexafluoride, regular uranium ore, right? Refine out the uranium, again, radiation shielding everywhere. Then you have to basically chemically turn it into a gas to create uranium hexafluoride. And this gas, right, is the particles, some of them are going to be U-235 and some are going to be U-238. I think I got that right. And the U-238 is what you want. So what you need to do is get those particles to separate. And the best way to do it, there's a couple of techniques, but the most popular is to spin them in a centrifuge so fast that they start to separate. The problem is when you're doing the difference of weights is literally 2 protons, or 2 neutrons. So you're talking about a tiny, tiny difference in weight between what you want and what you don't want. And so that's why you have to run them through centrifuges thousands and thousands and thousands of times, spinning at this like ridiculously fast rate. It's really hard, right? And even then, even at your best, you can maybe refine it to 25-30% purity, and that's the most effective you can get, right? And this is why when you talk about like nuclear arms control agreements, a lot of them include provisions about how much you can refine uranium, because you can build a fission reactor by just refining it to like 5 or 10%, but to build a weapon you need to get north of 20%, 20, 30, 40, 50%. And it really makes you appreciate the fact that this is a process that takes years of continuously spinning these industrial level centrifuges, and that sort of stuff. I mean, it really makes you appreciate the incredible scale, right, that the U.S. government in the 40s, so 70 years ago, before when computers were still a job a person could have, right, and they were able to refine this uranium into something that could be pure enough to build a weapon. Right, so again, it's not exactly harvesting the soul or whatever of a dead planet, but it's still really, really challenging to build the component parts of these super weapons.
The cannon and its titanic impact makes it highly coveted by Imperial commanders. The actual sound and visual blast upon impact of a Quake shell is not easily described, because when a Quake shell makes its impact, it will do so with a near unimaginable blast. The concentrated agony and seismic tearing forces of a dying world distilled down into a planet-shattering blast. Essentially, it's delivering a concentrated piece of Exterminatus. Beyond just cracking through heavy fortress walls or turning a warlord titan into craters of liquid metal and slag, it's not uncommon for the Quake shell to cause also instant geological fissures, huge cracking fault lines that can begin to appear across the outer walled perimeter of a citadel. Buildings may disappear into the depths of a planet, and any survivors of the blast will be swallowed by the cracked surface of a world. Unleashing a munition as powerful as the Quake shell can quite easily lead to unforeseen consequences like earthquakes or spewing magma from below ground. In the worst possible situations, it could potentially even lead to seismic chain reactions that could in fact destroy entire cities or even worse. Most often...
Interesting, also to draw a nuclear weapons analogy, when they were designing the first fission bomb, there was a lot. It was not settled that the weapon would not ignite the atmosphere. This is a problem because, as you know, oxygen can burn, right? A pure oxygen environment can absolutely burn. And so the fear was that it would create a level of heat such that it would ignite the Earth's oxygen and would subsequently cause a globe-spanning firestorm, destroying all life. And remember, this is the era before computers, so they just had to work it out mathematically. And they were really confident that it wasn't going to ignite the atmosphere, but they still had like a lot of mathematicians checking this and rechecking it and checking it again. And I'm sure everybody there acknowledged that there's just a small chance that we missed something, or that there's something going on with this nuclear weapon that we may not understand, and it might ignite the atmosphere and kill us all.
And though it will simply enable a breach in enemy fortifications that will leave them reeling and so confused that by the time they're assessing damage and attempting to fortify, the next blow will already be upon them as Imperial forces and thousands of guardsmen rush to breach the defences. But there are still alternate roles. It's not the preference, but if there were no suitable ordnance available, a very skillful Imperial commander may be able to maneuver a vehicle to direct a Quake Cannon towards large enemies or even large hordes of enemy. This though is generally difficult, as the cannon is nearly always hull mounted and configured for long range engagement.
What's interesting is that another use of it would be area denial, right? Let's say you wanted the enemy to not go somewhere, you would maybe show them, or just shoot this Quake Cannon into it and get them to divert in another direction. This would probably be something like an orc horde coming at you. You want to funnel them into a mountain pass, say. Well, then you're going to use your Quake Cannon. Don't need to change it. You don't need to remaneuver it. You just got to drop enough rounds on to that area that the horde pushes into, say, the mountain pass instead of the less desirable terrain.
Even when mounted upon an Imperial Guard tank, the lack of speed means it's hardly suited to do hunting down war engines. It is best deployed against near enough stationary targets. However, if an enemy position is able to be scouted without their knowing, then a Quake Cannon could absolutely devastate enemy infantry and hardware before a battle has even begun and potentially save significant resources. This would carefully be weighed up by an Imperial commander because Quake shells are certainly not what you would describe as a plentiful munition. If an enemy can be destroyed through sheer weight of Imperial Guard manpower and the lives of Astra Militarum guardsmen, then so be it. If there's an opportunity to save hundreds of pieces of Imperial hardware, knights, perhaps even titans, then opting to deploy Quake Cannon shells may well be preferable.
I just love that shit. The Imperium's cheapest currency is lives, and every other piece of equipment is more valuable.
Within the Banesword tank-mounted Quake Cannon, arcane targeting augers are maintained by the tech priests and their servitors, who will monitor the blows of the Quake Cannon. Very likely
I want to know more about this guy. This looks like some sort of insane tech priest tank crew member.
Whispering prayers over the shoulders of the drivers and gunners. It is their skill which helps to ensure that even when fired over absolutely massive distances, the accuracy of the weapon is maintained to a high degree, for it truly has to be. A Quake Cannon is not a weapon to miss your target with. A stray blast could have dire consequences, not to mention, of course, also just wasting the round.
Yeah, but when you're talking about an area weapon, you don't need to be super precise. You just gotta hit, like, the city.
It is noteworthy that...
I mean, that's the advantage of the area weapon, right? The nuclear doctrine, they call it the CEP, the Circular Area Probable. And that is the circle that forms the radius that you are 50% certain the round will land inside, the warhead will land inside. And they use that to model how likely a target is to be destroyed and how many nuclear weapons to throw at a given target. Obviously, over time, the targeting systems are continuously improved, and the circular area probable shrinks down, and now it can be measured in a couple hundred meters.
During the Cadian 87th's assault against traitor guardsmen on Chandrex 2, a Quake shell narrowly missed the top of a fortress wall and landed in the distance. The sudden vibrations of where it actually came to fall disturbed a dormant Necron monolith, and the ensuing implacable wave of awoken warriors ended up actually destroying the Cadian regiment. A fairly specific set of circumstances to be sure, but it's noteworthy that the power of a Quake shell is in fact so great that it can, quite literally, wake the dead.
Nice one, Luetin. Nice.
So the recoil of the Quake Cannon is understandably enormous, and whilst a Nemesis Titan, essentially a warlord, can handle...
Here's the thing, right? That's like saying that the recoil of a nuclear shell is definitely enormous. It isn't necessarily. Oh, what's that? You didn't know nuclear shells were a thing? Oh yeah, in the 50s, the military that were terrified because they thought instead of having to fight giant set-piece battles, that battles would be decided by nuclear weapons, and that, soldiers were irrelevant. So the U.S. Army commissioned a whole bunch of half-baked schemes to try to integrate nuclear weapons into their forces. This was before mutually assured destruction was a thing, and they had two completely bonkers ideas. The first was the nuclear artillery shell. This is shooting a nuclear-equipped shell, 10, 15, 20 miles out of a big howitzer and trying to shell the enemy with nuclear weapons. It was pretty preposterous and just inferior to an ICBM or a bomber in every way. But the other, even more ridiculous one, was the Davy Crockett. This was a crew-served nuclear weapon that, frankly, the crew were not expected to survive its deployment. This was literally a bazooka charge with a tactical nuke that a 3-person team was meant to go, set up, shoot at, advancing Soviet tanks, and then retreat safely. But, of course, the math was clear. They wouldn't be able to not get a lethal dose of radiation because a bazooka just doesn't have that kind of range.
This shockwave when
the point is that none of these things would have had a greater recoil than just the mass, the propulsion charge, right? You need enough of a charge to propel the projectile forward, but the power that the projectile packs is not a function of its recoil, right? That's only true in inert weapons like a slug, right? For example, or a shotgun slug or a full metal jacket round, something where there's no explosive component.
Fired relatively well, the Imperial Guard have more of a challenge in mounting such a heavy weapon as the Quake Cannon on a tank chassis, and this means that Banesword tanks are required to be one of the most robust vehicles within the Astra Militarum and indeed the Imperium. Banesword tanks are of course based on the STC of the Bane Blade, and consequently only a small percentage of Forge Worlds are able to manufacture both the vehicle and weapon. Where a Warlord Titan may be equipped with a single Mars Alpha pattern Nemesis Quake Cannon, there remains of course one Titan larger, the Imperator Titan, which is, as you may expect, capable of having multiple Quake Cannons mounted on its carapace hardpoint. But even Warlords are not exclusively restricted to using the Quake Cannon only on the Nemesis. There is also another arm-mounted variation for Warlord Titans known as the Mori Quake Cannon. And the Mori Quake Cannon is in fact one of the most devastating weapons a Warlord Titan can bear. The immense quake shells it fires when used against a battlefield target are of course easily capable of wreaking utter annihilation. The seismic shockwave that these shells cause can leave any enemy unfortunate enough to survive slowed down to a crawl, making them easy prey for the Titan's other weapons or supporting Imperial Knights to then tear them apart. And I had not noted it to this point, and perhaps to the end, that the effect of something like a quake shell would have on smaller infantry elements, but that's because it should be very obvious that for any ground infantry caught in the shockwave or the sight of a Quake Cannon could very easily suffer an entire list of injuries, from being simply vaporized to having their body near enough liquefied by just the shockwave, broken bones, blindness, or just internal wounds.
Yeah, plus the seismic effect may actually be pretty devastating. Again, if you're in the open and you're in an earthquake, not a big deal, but even a little bit of rubble, or if there were fissures in the ground, it would swallow people up. Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a super overpowered weapon, to be sure.
There's hardly a battlefield injury that isn't likely to be caused by the blast of a Quake Cannon. As per usual, these lore gear videos are on the shorter side of things, but I'll just finish off by saying, we often talk about the grim darkness of the 40k verse, and it's something I want to drill down on more separately. But there can be fewer grim, dark weapons than a gun shooting gigantic shells capable of liquefying a warlord titan, containing the shattered remnants and the death screams of a dying world, having been summarily condemned to Exterminatus by the bleak dystopian bureaucracy of the Imperium of mankind.
Yep. Alright. Whew, guys, that was no joke. No joke. You know what? The weapons in Warhammer 40k are, of course, deliberately, insanely over the top, ridiculous. I'm curious, how does this play on the tabletop? I can't conceive of how you could fight on a tabletop at all against something with a mounted Quake Cannon. Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely really curious. Also, guys, thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the merch store. Check out the second channel with more and more video game content every week. I've got, of course, a Twitch channel now. Check out the Instagram and the MMA podcast I run with my brother. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.